The city was wrapped in a blanket of soft snow that night. Lights blinked from every shop window, trees shimmered with gold and red, and the streets were filled with people carrying bags of gifts and laughter in their voices. It was Christmas Eve, the night everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone except one man who sat alone in the corner of a quiet restaurant. He had chosen a table near the window, not for the view, but because it was the farthest from the crowd. The glow from the lights outside cast long reflections on the glass, making it look as though the snowflakes were falling right onto his plate. His meal sat untouched. The steak had gone cold long ago, and the glass of wine in front of him barely shimmered in the candlelight. The man's name was Ethan Cole. People in the business world knew him well. He was the kind of name that came up in magazines and on financial news screens. A man who built a company from the ground up, who made sharp decisions and never looked back. To many, he was the picture of success. Tailored suits, quiet power, a car that cost more than most people's homes. But tonight, none of that seemed to matter. He looked out the window, watching families walk past, their laughter muffled by the glass. Parents carried sleepy children in their arms, couples held hands, and groups of friends posed for pictures under the big Christmas tree across the street. Ethan's eyes lingered on them for a moment before dropping back to his table. He picked up his fork, then set it down again. The restaurant buzzed with low chatter and soft music, but it all seemed far away from him, like a world he no longer belonged to. He wasn't always this way. Years ago, Christmas meant something different. There had been a time when his house was full of noise, the smell of cookies baking, the sound of laughter echoing down the hall. He used to rush home from work just to watch his wife decorate the tree. She always said he was terrible at it, that he hung all the ornaments too close together. She'd tease him and he'd pretend to be offended, but secretly he loved every minute of it. Now even thinking about those moments felt like pressing on an old bruise. Too much time had passed, but some memories never lost their sting. A waiter walked by, glancing at his table. "Would you like me to warm up your meal, sir?" the young man asked politely. Ethan looked up, surprised for a moment. "No, thank you," he said quietly. His voice carried the kind of weight that made people step back without knowing why. The waiter nodded and moved on. Ethan sighed and leaned back in his chair. He had everything people said they wanted: success, respect, money. Yet here he was, spending Christmas Eve alone in a restaurant, eating food he couldn't taste. A couple sat 2 tables away, whispering to each other, their hands brushing together on the table. They were smiling like the world couldn't touch them. Another table had a large family. Parents, grandparents, and 2 small kids giggling as they played with paper napkins folded into funny shapes. The youngest girl squealed when her father made a napkin bunny hop across the table. Ethan turned his eyes away. He hadn't spoken to his own family in years. Work had come first, always. When his younger sister had invited him to her wedding, he sent a gift instead of going. When his parents grew sick, his assistant sent flowers. He told himself he was too busy, that everything he was doing was for them. But in truth, it was easier to bury himself in work than to face the empty spaces that life had left behind. He took a sip of his wine, the taste bitter on his tongue. Outside, a group of children ran past the window, chasing each other in the snow. Their laughter echoed faintly through the glass. He found himself watching them longer than he meant to. Something about their joy, the kind that didn't need reason or permission, felt foreign to him now. He couldn't remember the last time he laughed like that. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir. Would you like dessert? We have a Christmas special. Apple pie with cinnamon ice cream." Ethan looked up at the waitress. She was smiling, the kind of smile they trained for in restaurants, polite but distant. "No, thank you," he said again. She nodded and walked away. He could hear the sound of cutlery, the clinking of glasses, and the faint hum of a Christmas song playing through the speakers. He knew the song. His wife used to hum it while cooking. For a second, he closed his eyes, and it almost felt like he could smell her perfume again, hear her laughter. Then the moment passed, and the silence returned. He glanced at his watch. It was barely 7. The night stretched endlessly ahead of him. He didn't know why he'd come here in the first place. Maybe it was habit, something to make him feel less pathetic than eating alone in his empty apartment. Maybe he just couldn't face another night staring at the walls, pretending he didn't feel the emptiness pressing down. His assistant had tried to invite him to a company dinner earlier that week. "Sir, the team would love to have you join us," she'd said, hopeful. He'd waved it off, saying he had other plans. But the truth was he had no plans at all. He never did. He took out his phone and scrolled through his messages. A few business partners had sent the usual formal greetings. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Cole. Looking forward to another successful year." Not a single personal message. Not one that said, "How are you?" or "Are you doing okay?" He set the phone down and exhaled slowly. It was strange how quiet success could be. A faint sound of laughter came from behind him. He turned slightly. At a nearby table sat a young couple and a little girl, maybe 6 or 7. Her cheeks were red from the cold and her hair was tied into 2 messy braids. She was coloring on a paper placemat while her parents talked softly. Every few minutes she'd show them her drawing and they'd smile and nod with pride. Ethan found himself watching without meaning to. The girl reminded him of someone, not exactly in face but in spirit. His wife used to talk about having a daughter someday. They never got the chance. He looked away, feeling a familiar tightness in his chest. He tried to focus on his food, but he couldn't eat. He picked up his glass again, watching the way the candlelight flickered through the wine. Outside, the snow kept falling, heavier now. The streetlights cast halos of gold in the misty air. Everything looked peaceful, even magical. And yet he felt like he was behind a glass wall looking in on a world that had forgotten him. The waitress returned with the bill. "Take your time, sir," she said softly, setting it down. Maybe she sensed something in his silence, the heaviness that hung around him. He nodded, not looking up. After she walked away, he opened the leather folder and slipped in his card. As he waited, his eyes drifted again to the little girl's table. She was now standing on her chair, trying to hang a paper snowflake on a small decorative tree at the center of their table. Her father gently lifted her so she could reach. When she managed to hang it, she clapped her hands in delight, her laughter bright and pure. Ethan smiled without realizing it. It was small but real, the first time his face had softened in months. But just as quickly the smile faded. He looked down again, ashamed of the warmth that had crept into his chest. The waitress returned with his card. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Cole," she said kindly. He paused before replying. "Thank you," he said quietly, "and Merry Christmas to you." It was a small exchange, but even that felt strange. Words that once came easily now felt like they belonged to someone else. He put on his coat and scarf, adjusted the collar, and glanced at his reflection in the window before leaving. His face looked tired. Not old exactly, but worn, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. As he stepped outside, the cold air bit at his skin. He tucked his hands into his pockets and started walking toward his car parked down the street. The snow crunched under his shoes. Music drifted from a nearby shop, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. He stopped for a moment, looking at the big Christmas tree in the square. Families were gathered around it, taking pictures, laughing, hugging. For a second, he wanted to walk closer, to just stand among them and feel that warmth. But the thought made him uneasy. He didn't belong there. Not anymore. He turned away and kept walking. He passed a bakery with fogged-up windows. Inside, people were still buying last-minute pies and cookies. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the air when the door opened. A little boy ran out holding a small box tied with a red ribbon, his mother calling after him to slow down. Ethan watched them disappear into the snow. He remembered a time when he used to bring home sweets, too. His wife had loved pastries. She'd always say she didn't want dessert, then steal bites from his plate. He'd tease her about it, pretending to guard his food, and she'd laugh so hard she'd cry. He could still hear her voice if he let himself. But he didn't. He'd learned not to. By the time he reached his car, his hands were numb from the cold. He got in, started the engine, and sat there for a long time, not moving. The heater hummed softly, fogging up the windows. He looked out through the misty glass at the people still walking by, strangers with lives full of noise and color. He envied them, though he'd never admit it. They had something he couldn't buy, something he'd traded away piece by piece without realizing it. Connection, love, belonging. His phone buzzed again. Another email from work. He ignored it. For a moment, he thought about driving home. But home didn't really feel like home. It was a penthouse with expensive furniture and big windows overlooking the city. but no warmth, no laughter, no life. Just silence and the sound of the clock ticking. He leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The hum of the city filled the background, cars, voices, distant music. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made the loneliness sharper. He didn't know how long he sat there staring at nothing. Eventually, the sound of small footsteps broke his trance. He looked up and saw the same little girl from the restaurant, walking ahead of her parents, her tiny boots leaving prints in the snow. She was laughing, spinning in circles as snowflakes landed in her hair. Her parents followed close behind, holding hands, smiling at her playfulness. Ethan watched them pass by, and for a moment, the world felt still. The girl turned her head slightly and caught his eyes through the window. She smiled, a big, bright, fearless smile, at him and waved. He blinked, caught off guard. Before he could react, she had turned back to her parents and skipped away. Her laughter echoed faintly through the glass. Ethan sat there watching until they disappeared around the corner. Something about that brief moment, that small, unguarded smile, lingered. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even curiosity. It was just kindness, the kind that asked for nothing in return. He didn't know it yet, but that smile would stay with him through the night. When he finally drove away, the streets had grown quieter. The snow kept falling, blanketing everything in white. The radio played another Christmas song, soft and distant. He didn't change the station. For once, he let it play. At a red light, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized himself. The hard edges, the tired eyes. But somewhere beneath all that, maybe there was still a trace of the man who used to laugh easily, who used to love, who used to believe in warmth and family. He didn't know why, but a thought crossed his mind. Maybe tomorrow, he'd call his sister. Maybe. He wasn't sure what he'd say or if she'd even answer, but it was the first time in years he'd even thought about it. The light turned green. He pressed the pedal and the car rolled forward through the snow-covered streets. The world outside glowed softly, and though he was still alone, the ache inside him felt a little less sharp. Somewhere deep down, something small had begun to stir, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next day dawned quietly. The city was still blanketed in white, the streets shining under the weak morning sun. The rush and noise of Christmas Eve had faded into a calm stillness. Most shops were closed, and only the sound of church bells rang faintly across the frozen air. Ethan sat by the window of his apartment, a mug of coffee cooling beside him. The city stretched below, gray rooftops, tiny figures moving through the snow, the smoke of chimneys rising slowly into the sky. From up here, the world looked peaceful, almost distant. He had been awake since early morning. Sleep had never come easy to him, but last night had been worse. He kept seeing that little girl's smile in his mind, the way she had waved at him through the restaurant window. He didn't even know why it mattered, but somehow it did. Something about her innocence, her unfiltered joy, had stirred something in him. It had made him realize how long it had been since anyone had looked at him without judgment or expectation. He took a slow sip of coffee, staring blankly ahead. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Every sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, felt louder than it should. There were no decorations, no sign that it was Christmas Day. Years ago, his wife had filled their home with color, red ribbons, pine cones, lights wrapped around every railing. She used to hum while decorating, her hair tied messily, her hands covered in glitter. He could still remember her laughter when he pretended not to notice she'd hung mistletoe above the doorway. Now, there was nothing. No tree, no music. Just the sterile emptiness of a place that existed only to be lived in, not loved. He looked down at his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He could call his sister, he thought. But the thought froze before it reached his fingertips. What would he even say? Hey, it's me. Merry Christmas. Sorry for disappearing for the last 5 years. The words felt strange even in his mind, so he set the phone down again and stood up. Maybe he'd go for a walk. Sitting here wasn't helping. He grabbed his coat and scarf and stepped out into the cold. The air bit at his face the moment he stepped outside, but it felt good. Real, sharp, something that reminded him he was still part of the world. The streets were quiet with only a few people out. Families heading to relatives' homes, kids dragging sleds behind them, couples walking close together. He passed the same restaurant from the night before. It was closed now, the windows dark, a Merry Christmas sign taped to the door. For a moment he stopped and looked inside. The same table in the corner was there, empty as before. He could almost see himself sitting there alone, staring at his cold food. He shook the thought away and kept walking. As he turned down a side street, he noticed a small park at the corner, the kind of park that went unnoticed most of the year. But today it was alive. Children were playing in the snow, building snowmen and throwing snowballs. Parents stood nearby laughing and watching. Ethan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. He stood near the fence watching quietly. There was something soothing about it. The sound of laughter, the crunch of snow, the sight of families together. It made the cold feel softer somehow, and then he saw her. The little girl from the restaurant and the one with the braids and red cheeks. She was wearing the same pink hat, her scarf hanging loose as she ran through the snow. Her parents were nearby, helping her roll a big snowball for what looked like the base of a snowman. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Of all places, he hadn't expected to see her again. He stood there, unsure if he should walk away or stay. She hadn't noticed him yet. He told himself it was just coincidence, that it didn't mean anything. But still he stayed watching. She laughed as she fell into the snow, her parents rushing to help her up. Her father dusted the snow from her coat while her mother tied her scarf properly. The whole scene felt warm. For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes, just listening to their laughter. It was the sound of something pure, something he had long forgotten. When he opened his eyes again, she was looking right at him. It was sudden. Their eyes met across the small park. She tilted her head, squinting for a moment as if trying to recognize him. Then her face lit up in a smile. Before he could react, she waved. Ethan blinked, almost embarrassed. He wasn't sure what to do, so he gave a small nod. Awkward, hesitant. But the girl didn't seem to mind. She turned to her parents and tugged on her mother's coat, pointing in his direction. Her mother looked up, then back at him. There was a polite smile on her face, the kind people give strangers they don't quite understand but mean no harm. She said something to her daughter, probably telling her to come back to building the snowman. But the girl shook her head and ran toward him. Ethan stiffened. "Wait!" her mother called. But the girl was already halfway across the snow. She stopped a few steps from him, her breath visible in the cold air. Her cheeks were red, her nose pink from the chill. She looked up at him with wide eyes, completely fearless. "Hi," she said cheerfully. Ethan hesitated. "Hello." "You were in the restaurant last night," she said, her words tumbling out fast like she was afraid she might forget them. "You were sitting all by yourself." "I saw you," he nodded slowly. "Yes, I was." "You didn't have anyone with you?" Her words were innocent, but they hit harder than she could have known. He didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. "I didn't." She looked thoughtful for a second, then said, "That's not good. It's Christmas. Nobody should be alone on Christmas." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by how simply she said it. Before he could respond, her parents caught up. "Lila," her father said gently, "you can't just run off like that." The girl, Lila, we looked up at him, then turned back to Ethan. "But he was alone," she said, as if that explained everything. Her mother smiled apologetically. "I'm so sorry, sir. She's very friendly." "It's all right," Ethan said quietly. "She's just being kind." Lila looked at him again, her small face serious. "Do you want to have dinner with us tonight?" The words landed like a soft blow. For a moment, he wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "What?" she repeated, slower this time, as if speaking to someone who didn't understand English well. "Do you want to have dinner with us? We're making turkey and mashed potatoes. And cookies." Her parents froze. "Lila," her mother began, but the girl was still looking at him, expectant. Ethan felt something twist inside him, a strange mix of surprise, confusion, and something he hadn't felt in years, warmth. He didn't know how to answer. The logical part of him wanted to politely decline, thank her, and walk away. That would be the proper thing to do. But another part of him, a quieter, lonelier part, wanted to say yes. Her father chuckled awkwardly. "I'm sorry, sir. She tends to invite everyone to dinner. We can't even go to the grocery store without her asking the cashier to come home with us." Lila frowned. "It's Christmas. It's supposed to be for everyone." Her mother crouched down beside her. That's very sweet, honey, but we don't even know him. Lila turned to Ethan again. You look sad, she said simply. Mom says Christmas is for sharing and for helping people smile. Ethan swallowed hard. For a moment he couldn't speak. The words were so simple, but they cut through layers of walls he'd built over the years. I appreciate that, he said quietly, forcing a small smile. That's very kind of you. Her parents smiled politely, ready to guide her away, but then Lila did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small candy cane, wrapped in clear plastic. She held it up to him with both hands. This is for you, she said, so you don't forget Christmas next time. Ethan stared at it, unsure what to do. Slowly, he reached out and took it. Thank you, he said softly. That's very thoughtful, she beamed. You're welcome. Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Okay, sweetheart, we should get back. Grandma's waiting. Okay, she said. Then she looked up at Ethan one more time. Maybe next year you can eat with us, okay? He smiled faintly. Maybe. She nodded, satisfied, then turned and ran back to her parents. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the candy cane still in his hand. Her parents gave him another polite smile before walking away, their voices fading into the distance. He looked down at the little candy cane, small, simple, something that probably cost a few cents. But in his hand it felt like something far more valuable. It had been years since anyone had given him a gift without expecting something in return. He tucked it carefully into his coat pocket, as if it were made of glass. The walk back to his apartment felt different this time. The city didn't seem as cold. The air didn't sting as much. He noticed the way the light bounced off the snow, how the sound of church bells echoed softly in the distance. He couldn't explain it, but everything seemed a little less heavy. Back inside, he set the candy cane on the table and sat staring at it. The red and white stripes glistened faintly under the afternoon light. He thought about the girl's words. Do you want to have dinner with us? It was such a small thing, a child's innocent question, but somehow it had reached a place inside him that no one else had touched in years. For the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He found himself smiling without realizing it. He even made a cup of cocoa, something he hadn't done since his wife passed. He sat by the window again, holding the warm mug between his hands, watching the snow fall softly outside. As the evening light faded, he took out his phone once more. His thumb hovered over a contact he hadn't dialed in years, his sister. For several long minutes, he just stared at the name. Then slowly he pressed call. It rang once, twice, then a voice answered, "Hello?" He froze. For a moment he couldn't speak. The voice sounded older, softer, but it was her. "Hi," he said finally. His voice cracked slightly. "It's me." There was silence on the other end. Then a small laugh, surprised, almost disbelieving. "Ethan, is that really you?" "Yeah," he said. "It's me." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I can't believe it. It's been so long." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I should have called sooner." There was a pause, and then her voice softened. "I'm just glad you did," he smiled faintly. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas," she replied. "Are you okay?" He looked at the candy cane on the table, at the snow outside. "I think I will be," he said. They talked for almost an hour. Awkward at first, then easier, like finding a forgotten song you still remembered the words to. When they finally hung up, he felt lighter than he had in years. Before going to bed that night, he picked up the candy cane again and placed it carefully on his desk. It wasn't much, just a child's gesture, but to him, it meant everything, somewhere out there. A little girl had reminded him that not all things were lost, that even after years of silence, kindness could still find its way through the cracks. He lay down, the sound of the city faint outside his window, and for the first time in a very long while he fell asleep with a small, peaceful smile on his face. The next few days after Christmas passed quietly. The snow still covered the streets and the air was sharp and cold. People were back to their routines, cleaning up decorations, preparing to return to work or school. The city's sparkle was fading, but inside Ethan's apartment, something small had changed. The candy cane still sat on his desk, right beside his phone. Every time he walked past it, he couldn't help but smile a little. It was such a small thing, a simple, sweet reminder that someone, even for a brief moment, had thought of him. And not because of his name or his company or his money, just him. He had spoken to his sister twice since Christmas Day. The conversations were still cautious, but they were there. A start. They talked about their parents, about small things, about nothing really important, but still something that filled the silence that had lasted too long. Each call ended with the same words, "Let's talk again soon." And somehow that was enough for now. But what he couldn't stop thinking about was the little girl, Lila. The way she had looked up at him with those honest eyes, her words so simple yet powerful. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" It had been an invitation from a stranger, but one that had touched him deeper than any grand gesture ever could. A week passed. New Year's Eve approached, and with it came the usual fireworks, noise, and cheer. Ethan watched it all from his window, a glass of water in his hand instead of champagne. He had stopped drinking heavily years ago, not for any noble reason. He just didn't see the point anymore. Tonight, though, as the sky burst with colors and cheers echoed across the city, he found himself whispering something he hadn't said in years. Maybe this year will be different. He didn't even know if he believed it, but saying it out loud felt good. A few days into January, he went back to work. The office greeted him the same way it always did, quiet, efficient, and a little too polished. People smiled politely, greeted him with respect, but there was distance in their tone. The kind of politeness reserved for someone powerful but unreachable. He was used to it. Maybe he had even built it that way. But now, after everything, he started noticing it more. The stiffness in the air, the lack of real conversation. His assistant asked how his holidays went, and he almost told her about the little girl and the candy cane. But he stopped himself. It felt too personal, too fragile to explain. At lunch, he sat in his office alone, as usual. The city skyline stretched outside his glass windows, bright but cold. He stared at his food, remembering how that small family had laughed together in the restaurant. Something in him ached quietly. That night he went home and stood by the window again, looking down at the snow-covered park below. He could see children playing even in the cold, bundled up in scarves and hats, their laughter floating up faintly to his floor. He wondered if Lila was one of them. It had been almost 2 weeks since he saw her. He didn't expect to ever see her again. She was just a passing kindness, a small moment that had already done its part in his story. But life, as it often did, had other plans. It was a Sunday afternoon when he decided to go for a walk again. The air was crisp but calm, and the streets were still dotted with bits of snow melting in the gutters. He wore a simple coat, a scarf wrapped neatly around his neck, and no plan other than to walk and clear his head. He ended up back at the same park without meaning to. It was smaller than he remembered, with bare trees stretching toward the pale winter sky. A few families were out, and children's laughter carried through the air. He smiled faintly as he watched them, then froze. There she was again. Lila. She was at the far end of the park, near a wooden bench, kneeling in the snow with her parents beside her. They were helping her build what looked like a crooked snow fort. Her laughter was bright and full, the kind of sound that reached your heart before your ears. Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to intrude. He told himself to just turn around, keep walking. But before he could decide, Lila spotted him. Her eyes widened with recognition, and then she grinned, the same big open smile as before. She jumped to her feet and waved enthusiastically. "Hey, it's you!" she shouted across the park. Her parents turned, startled, then looked at him and smiled politely, realizing who she meant. Ethan smiled back, raising a hand in a small wave. He didn't expect her to come running again, but of course she did. She dashed across the snow, her boots leaving uneven prints behind her. "You came back," she said excitedly, stopping in front of him, her breath fogging in the air. "I suppose I did," he said gently. "Looks like you're building something impressive." "It's my snow castle," she said proudly. "Dad says it's not very strong, but I think it's perfect." "I think it looks perfect too," Ethan said, glancing over her shoulder. Her parents approached, smiling as they recognized him. "Hello again," her father said kindly. "We didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Ethan replied, returning the smile. "I was just walking by," Lila grinned. "You should help." "We need more walls." Her father laughed. "I think we're good, sweetheart. I'm sure the gentleman has other things to do." But Ethan hesitated for a moment, then crouched slightly, brushing his gloves against the snow. "Well, I might be able to help for a few minutes," he said. Her eyes lit up. Really? Really? And just like that, he found himself on his knees in the snow, packing snow into rough bricks beside a 6-year-old and her parents. He hadn't done anything like this in decades. The cold seeped through his gloves and his knees ached a little. But he couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like this. Softly, without force, without pretense. Lila's parents introduced themselves properly this time. They were kind people, warm and down to earth. They lived only a few blocks away. Her father was a school teacher. Her mother worked part-time at a library. They talked easily, without asking him about his company or his money, without looking at him like a headline. For the first time in years, he felt normal. As they worked on the snow castle, Lila chattered endlessly about her school, her friends, her love for cookies and snow days. She even told him about the stray cat she wanted to adopt, but her parents said no because it made her sneeze. Ethan listened to every word, smiling, occasionally adding a comment or question. It felt effortless, something he hadn't felt in years. After a while, Lila clapped her hands. "Done," she announced proudly. The snow fort stood crooked but sturdy, decorated with small twigs and leaves. Her parents applauded, and even Ethan gave a small clap. "Looks like a castle fit for a queen," he said. She giggled. "Or a princess." "Of course," he said, smiling. Then her mother checked her watch. "All right, time to head home. We promised Grandma we'd be there by 5. Lila pouted. "Already?" Her father chuckled. "You can't keep Grandma waiting, you know that." She sighed dramatically, then looked up at Ethan. "You could come too, you know," she said matter-of-factly. "We have cookies." Her parents both laughed. "Lila, not everyone can come for cookies, sweetheart." Ethan smiled softly. "That's very kind of you to offer. Maybe another time." She looked disappointed for a moment, then brightened. "Okay, then next time you have to come. Promise?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." She smiled wide, satisfied with that answer. As they said their goodbyes, her father handed him a small card. "We host a small neighborhood dinner every few weeks," he said. "Just casual. Friends, family, that kind of thing. You're welcome to stop by sometime if you'd like." Ethan took the card, surprised. "Thank you. That's very kind." They waved as they left, Lila turning to shout one more, "Bye," before disappearing around the corner. Ethan stood there for a long time after they left, looking at the card in his hand. A simple address, a phone number, and a note. "You're always welcome to join." He slipped it into his pocket, feeling something warm spread through his chest. It wasn't just about being invited, it was about being seen. A week later, he found himself staring at the same card again. It was Friday evening, and he was home from work early for once. His apartment was silent except for the hum of the heater.
He had spent most of the week thinking about whether he should go. He had made excuses to himself. He didn't know them that well. It would be awkward. He might feel out of place.
But underneath all those reasons was something else. Fear. Fear of connection. Fear of being reminded of what he had lost. But then he thought about Lila, about the way her small hand had offered him that candy cane, the way she had said nobody should be alone on Christmas. He took a deep breath, put on his coat, and left. The neighborhood was quiet when he arrived, rows of small houses with warm light glowing from the windows. He found the right one easily. Laughter and the smell of food drifted out even before he reached the door. He hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door opened almost immediately. Lila's mother stood there, surprised but pleased. "Oh, you came." He smiled awkwardly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Come in." "It's freezing out there." He stepped inside, warmth wrapping around him instantly. The house was cozy and full of life. Coats hung by the door, laughter came from the kitchen, and the faint sound of music played somewhere in the background. Lila ran up the moment she saw him. "You came," she said excitedly. "I told you we had cookies." He laughed softly. "You did." Her father came over, shaking his hand. "Glad you could make it. Dinner's almost ready." They led him to the dining room where a long table was set with plates, bowls, and candles. A few other neighbors were already there, friendly faces who greeted him warmly. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it felt more alive than any event he'd attended in years. Dinner was loud, cheerful, messy, people passing dishes, telling stories, laughing. Lila insisted on sitting next to him, and throughout the meal she talked nonstop. He listened, ate slowly, and felt something inside him begin to ease, a feeling he hadn't recognized in a long time. When the meal ended, they moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. Lila proudly served cookies she'd helped bake. He took one and she watched eagerly as he bit into it. "Well?" she asked, eyes wide. "It's perfect," he said sincerely. "Best cookie I've had in years." She grinned so wide her eyes almost disappeared. As the evening went on, he found himself laughing with everyone, sharing small stories from his past, stories he hadn't told anyone in years. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He felt part of something. Later, when it was time to leave, Lila handed him another candy cane. "For next time," she said seriously. He took it with a smile. "Thank you. I'll keep it safe," she nodded proudly. "You better." He walked home through the quiet streets, the air cold but his heart warm. In his pocket, the candy cane felt like a promise. Not just of friendship, but of something deeper. Something that said life could still surprise him. Still offer small moments of light even after years of darkness. That night, as he placed the new candy cane beside the old one on his desk, he realized something simple but powerful, and sometimes the smallest kindness could open the biggest doors. And this time, he wasn't going to let them close again. The weeks after that dinner passed gently, like soft snow melting into the earth. For once, the days didn't blur together in silence or loneliness. Something inside Ethan had shifted. His apartment no longer felt like a cage. It was still quiet, but it wasn't empty. The two candy canes on his desk had become small symbols of something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. Every time he looked at them, he smiled, remembering Lila's laughter and the sound of everyone talking around that dinner table. He remembered the way her parents treated him like an ordinary guest, not a powerful man or a stranger. Just someone who had a place at their table, and slowly, that feeling began to change him in ways he hadn't expected. He started walking more often, through the park, through the streets where small cafes stood with fogged-up windows. People greeted him sometimes now. He wasn't invisible anymore. Once, an older man sitting on a bench recognized him from one of his company's charity events. The man started talking about the local food bank that was struggling through the winter. Ethan listened, really listened, and later that week he quietly arranged for a donation. Not through the company, not for publicity, but simply because he could. He didn't tell anyone. It wasn't about that. It was about doing something real. At work, his employees noticed small changes too. He started taking interest in their ideas again, asking about their families, making time for real conversation. He no longer barked orders from behind his glass walls. He walked the floors, checked on projects, smiled. The atmosphere shifted. People relaxed around him. One afternoon, his assistant hesitated by the door. "Sir," she said softly, "you seem different lately. Happier, maybe?" He looked up from his papers, smiled faintly, and said, "Maybe I am." She smiled back, a little surprised, then added, "Whatever it is, it suits you." He chuckled quietly after she left. Maybe it did. One cold Saturday morning, Ethan found himself back at the park again. It had become a quiet habit now, something grounding. The snow was thinner, melting into small puddles, and the sun was gentle, touching the trees with light. He spotted Lila almost instantly. She was at the swings this time, bundled in a bright red coat, her parents watching from a nearby bench. When she saw him, her face lit up, and she waved so hard that one of her mittens flew off. He laughed and walked toward her. "You'll lose all your fingers if you keep throwing your gloves around," he teased gently. She grinned. "I won't." "They always come back." Her father stood up to greet him. "Well, look who's back," he said warmly. "You're becoming a regular here." "Seems that way," Ethan said with a smile. They chatted for a while. Simple things. The weather, the neighborhood, the small bakery that had opened nearby. Lila kept swinging and occasionally called out random thoughts, interrupting their conversation in the best way possible. "Do you like pancakes?" she asked suddenly. Ethan blinked. "I do. Good. You should come for breakfast one day. Mom makes the best pancakes." Her mother laughed from the bench. "Lila, you can't just invite people to breakfast like that." "Yes, I can," Lila insisted. "He's my friend." Her words made Ethan pause. Friend, it had been a long, long time since anyone had called him that. He smiled softly. That sounds wonderful, Lila. Maybe one day. Over the next few weeks, one day became real. It started with small visits, an afternoon tea, a walk through the park, helping Lila build another snow fort when the weather turned colder again. Her parents always welcomed him, never making it feel formal or forced. One Sunday morning, he finally accepted Lila's breakfast invitation. He brought a small basket of pastries from a nearby bakery. When he arrived, the smell of pancakes and coffee filled the air. The house was warm, alive with chatter. Lila's father was at the stove, flipping pancakes with dramatic flair while Lila clapped each time one landed on the plate. Her mother laughed, shaking her head as she set the table. Ethan handed over the pastries awkwardly. I thought these might go with breakfast. Oh, that's perfect, her mother said with a grateful smile. You didn't have to bring anything. I wanted to, he replied softly. Breakfast was messy, full of syrup and laughter and crumbs on the table. Lila made him try one of each topping, chocolate chips, strawberries, honey. He played along, pretending to rate them like a food critic, making her laugh until she almost spilled her milk. Afterward, they sat by the window, sipping coffee while Lila colored quietly on the floor. Sunlight streamed through the glass, and for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the usual weight pressing on his chest. He wasn't thinking about work or the past. He wasn't thinking about what he didn't have. He was just there, in the moment. As the weeks went by, Lila grew more attached to him. She called him her grown-up friend, and her parents joked that he had been adopted into the family. He didn't mind. In fact, he loved it. Sometimes they invited him to small neighborhood gatherings. Nothing fancy, just a few families sharing food and laughter. He was shy at first, unused to such closeness. But over time, he began to enjoy it. He learned the names of the neighbors, helped carry boxes during one family's move, even helped fix a fence one weekend. Each small act brought him closer to something he hadn't realized he'd been missing all along: community. And yet, even as he felt happier, a quiet sadness lingered underneath. Because every now and then, he'd look at that little family and feel a pang, a reminder of what he once had and lost. He still remembered the years when his own life had been full of laughter like this. Before the distance grew between him and his sister. Before success turned into solitude. One evening, as he walked home after dinner at Lila's house, snow began to fall again, soft and slow like feathers. He stopped in the middle of the street, tilting his head back to let the flakes land on his face. It reminded him of childhood, of simpler times, of warmth that didn't need words. And in that moment, he made a quiet decision. He was going to change, not just for himself, but for others too. The next morning, he arrived at his office early. The building was quiet, sunlight spilling across the polished floor. He stood by the window watching the city below. For years, this view had felt like his only connection to the world, but now it looked different, less distant, more alive. He gathered his team later that day. We've done well this year, he said, but I think we can do better, not just as a company, but as people. They looked surprised. He continued, I want us to focus on something that actually helps others. We have resources, connections. Let's use them. He proposed starting a local outreach program, supporting schools, food drives, community projects. His team nodded, some hesitant, some enthusiastic. But by the end of the week, the idea had turned into a plan. And over the next few months, that plan came to life. They organized charity events, built partnerships with small organizations, and visited local shelters. Ethan personally showed up, not just as the CEO, but as someone who cared. The media eventually noticed, but this time he didn't care about the headlines. It wasn't for show. It was for real people. The same kind of people who had opened their door to him without expecting anything in return. One evening, Lila's father stopped by his office to thank him. I heard about what your company's been doing, he said. That's really something. Ethan smiled modestly. It's a start. You've done more than most, the man said. Then, after a pause, added, Lila talks about you all the time. Says you're her favorite grown-up. Ethan laughed softly. She keeps me busy, the man smiled. She's been through a lot, you know. She had a rough year before we met you. Lost her grandmother. You being around, it's helped her. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. She's helped me more than she'll ever know. Spring came slowly. The snow melted and the park turned green again. Lila ran through it freely now, chasing butterflies and shouting for him to watch. Her laughter filled the air, blending with birdsong. He joined her parents on the bench, smiling as he watched her. She's growing fast, her mother said. Sometimes I wish I could slow time down. He nodded. I know the feeling. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and calm. Then Lila came running back, her hands full of small wildflowers. These are for you, she said proudly, thrusting them toward Ethan. He took them gently, smiling. Thank you, Princess. They're for your house. So it doesn't feel lonely, she said simply. Something in his chest tightened. He swallowed and said softly, That's very thoughtful of you. Her mother smiled at her daughter, then at him. She has a big heart, yes, he said quietly. She really does. That night, he placed the flowers in a glass of water on his table next to the candy canes. The small, simple arrangement looked almost comical, but to him, it was perfect. He sat down and looked at them, the memories of the past months playing in his mind, the laughter, the shared meals, the kindness. All of it had reminded him of something he'd forgotten, that life wasn't meant to be lived alone. He picked up his phone and called his sister. This time their conversation wasn't awkward. They talked for hours about old memories, about meeting soon. When he hung up, he felt lighter. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The city lights glowed softly through the window. He thought of that Christmas night when a little girl had walked up to him and asked, Do you want to have dinner with us? That one small question had changed everything. And now, months later, he realized something important. Sometimes life doesn't need grand miracles. Sometimes it just needs one kind heart willing to reach out. A few days later, Lila's family invited him again, this time for a small spring picnic in the park. He brought a basket full of sandwiches and juice boxes, insisting on contributing. They laughed and teased him for overpacking, but he didn't care. They sat under the trees, eating and laughing, the sunlight warm on their faces. Lila ran around chasing bubbles, her laughter ringing through the air. At one point, she came running back to him, breathless. Guess what? What? He asked, pretending to be serious. I decided I'm going to be a helper when I grow up. Like you, she said proudly. He blinked, surprised. A helper? Yeah. You help people now, right? Mom told me. So I want to do that too. He smiled, his eyes softening. That's a wonderful dream, Lila. She nodded firmly. You can help me when I start. He chuckled. It's a deal. She grinned, satisfied, then ran off again, her laughter echoing through the park. As he watched her, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from success or solitude, but from connection, from being part of something that mattered. He turned to her parents and said quietly, Thank you for letting me be part of your world. Her father smiled. You're family now. You don't have to thank us, her mother nodded. You were meant to meet her, I think. Some people come into our lives at the right moment. You were one of them. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe she was the one meant to find me. That night, as he walked home, the city felt different again, not just a place of noise and light, but of stories and people connected in quiet ways. He realized that happiness wasn't something you chased alone. It was something you built together. One shared meal, one kind word, one invitation at a time. And it had all started with a little girl who saw a lonely man sitting by himself and decided to ask a simple question. Spring slowly turned into summer, and with it came warmth that filled both the city and Ethan's heart. The cold that once lived inside him, that quiet, heavy loneliness, had finally begun to fade. His days were no longer quiet echoes of the same routine. He woke up to sunlight instead of silence. He smiled more, laughed more. Sometimes even his coworkers noticed and joked that he seemed like a completely different person. He didn't deny it, because it was true. He was different now, not because his life had suddenly become perfect, but because it had become real. And it all started with one small act of kindness. One morning, he received a text from Lila's father. We're planning something for Lila's birthday, just a small picnic at the park. Would mean a lot if you came. Ethan smiled at the message. It was strange how natural it felt now, being included, being thought of. He immediately replied, I wouldn't miss it. He spent that entire evening preparing. He went to a small gift shop near his office, unsure of what to buy. There were rows of toys, books, and colorful things he didn't quite understand. After walking around for almost half an hour, he spotted something simple, a small music box shaped like a heart. When you wound it up, it played a soft tune. Inside, there was space for a tiny picture. He bought it without overthinking. Somehow, it just felt right. The day of the birthday came bright and warm. The park was full of laughter and the smell of food. Balloons danced in the breeze, and a big picnic blanket was spread under a tree. Ethan arrived with a basket in one hand and the small wrapped box in the other. Lila spotted him first, of course. She dropped what she was doing and ran to him, shouting, You came! You came! He laughed softly. I told you I would. She looked at the box curiously. Is that for me? Maybe, he teased. You'll have to wait and see. She giggled, running back to show her friends that her grown-up friend had come. Her parents waved warmly from a distance, and he joined them, greeting everyone with an ease he wouldn't have believed possible a year ago. The birthday was simple. Kids running around, laughter everywhere, sandwiches and juice boxes, someone playing music softly from a phone. But to Ethan, it felt more alive than any grand party he had ever attended in his life. When it was time for gifts, Lila opened each one carefully, her eyes wide with excitement every time. Then she reached for Ethan's box last. This one's from me, he said quietly, a bit nervous. She tore the paper gently, revealing the music box. As soon as she wound it, the soft tune began to play. Her eyes lit up. It's so pretty, she whispered. Open it, he said. She lifted the lid and gasped when she saw the small photo he'd placed inside. It was one her father had sent him a few weeks ago, of the four of them at the spring picnic. Lila stood in the middle, grinning from ear to ear. Her parents smiled as they saw it too. Lila looked up at him, her voice small but full of feeling. You put us in here? He nodded. So you'll always have your family close, even when you're grown up. She hugged him suddenly, her small arms tight around his neck. Thank you, she said. I love it. He hugged her back, his throat tight. You're very welcome. Her mother wiped her eyes quietly. That's beautiful, she said softly. He smiled. She's the one who gave me something first. I just wanted to give a little back. As the afternoon faded, the families began packing up. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky gold. Lila's parents invited him to stay for dinner afterward. They ate outside on the porch, watching the sky turn pink. Lila sat half asleep in her mother's lap. Still clutching the little music box, Ethan sat quietly, listening to the faint sound of crickets and distant laughter from the neighborhood. Her father turned to him after a while. You've really become part of our lives, you know that? Ethan smiled softly. You've all done more for me than you realize. Her mother nodded. You've done a lot too. Lila adores you. She talks about you all the time. He chuckled gently. She reminds me that kindness doesn't need a reason. I'd forgotten that. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and peaceful. Then her father spoke again, a bit hesitant. You ever think about having a family of your own again? Ethan looked out at the trees, thoughtful. I used to. Then I stopped. But lately, I think about it sometimes, he smiled faintly. Maybe not the way I used to imagine it. But family doesn't always mean blood, does it? Her father shook his head. No. Sometimes it's the people who find you when you need them most. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, like a little girl who decided a stranger shouldn't eat alone. They all smiled at that. Quiet laughter filling the warm evening air. Over the next few months, Ethan's life bloomed in ways he hadn't expected. He continued his company's outreach projects, but this time he became personally involved, visiting schools, helping fund community centers, and speaking to young people about resilience and kindness. He didn't talk about success or wealth. Instead, he talked about connection, about the importance of noticing people, of not walking past someone who looks alone. People listened not because he was a CEO, but because his words were honest, real. His story spread quietly, not through headlines, but through people. Small moments of kindness passed along. Sometimes, he'd come home to find drawings in the mail from local kids, thank you cards with crayon hearts and smiling stick figures. He kept them all, and every week or two he'd have dinner with Lila's family. It became a routine he looked forward to. Sometimes they ate together at home. Sometimes they went out for pizza or ice cream. No matter where they went, laughter followed. He felt like he belonged, something he hadn't felt in years. One late afternoon in autumn, almost a year after that first Christmas night, Ethan sat in the same restaurant where it had all begun. He hadn't planned it. He had just been walking and ended up there. The place looked the same. Warm lights, chatter, families sharing meals. He asked for the same corner table. The waiter smiled politely, not recognizing him. As he sat there, memories flooded back. The sound of holiday music, the clink of glasses, the little voice that had said, "Do you want to have dinner with us?" He could almost see that moment replaying in front of him. The small girl with bright eyes and the candy cane in her hand. He smiled to himself, realizing how much had changed since that night. How one simple question had turned a lonely life into something full of meaning. He ordered hot chocolate instead of wine this time, savoring the warmth. As he sat there, a family entered the restaurant, a couple and a small child. The little boy, barely 5, pointed toward Ethan's table curiously, just like Lila had once done. Ethan chuckled softly to himself. The father gave him a polite nod as they sat nearby. When the boy dropped his spoon by accident, Ethan picked it up and handed it back with a kind smile. "Thank you," the father said. Ethan smiled. "You're welcome." And for a moment the circle felt complete. The kindness that had once been given to him was now being passed on, quietly and naturally. Later that week, Lila's family invited him to their home again. This time, to celebrate the coming winter. They had put up decorations early. Twinkling lights wrapped around the porch. The smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. When Ethan arrived, Lila ran to him holding a box wrapped in red paper. "This is for you," she said excitedly. He laughed. "For me, what's the occasion?" "It's almost Christmas," she said. "You got me a music box, remember? So now it's my turn." He took the box gently, smiling. "Should I open it now?" "Yes," she said, bouncing on her feet. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small framed drawing, a picture Lila had made herself. It showed 4 stick figures holding hands, her parents, and him. Above it, in bright colors, she had written, "Our family." Ethan stared at it for a moment, his throat tight. "This is beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you, Lila," she grinned proudly. "Now you have a picture for your house, too." Her mother smiled from the doorway. She spent all week on that. Ethan held the drawing close, feeling his eyes sting. "It's the best gift I've ever received." That night after dinner, they sat together around the fireplace. Lila was half asleep again, curled up with a blanket. Her parents chatted quietly, the soft glow of the fire lighting their faces. Ethan looked around the room, the lights, the warmth, the laughter, and felt something settle deep in his heart. He realized he wasn't the same man who had sat alone that Christmas night a year ago. He had found connection again. He had found peace. More importantly, he had found family. And it hadn't come from success or plans or effort. It had come from a simple act of kindness, a question from a little girl who didn't see a CEO or a stranger or a lonely man. She had just seen someone who looked like he needed a friend. That was all it took. Later, when he got home, Ethan placed the framed drawing beside the candy canes and the flowers on his desk. He looked at them for a long moment, the story of his transformation sitting quietly before him. He smiled softly, then whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Lila." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, gentle, peaceful. He stood by the window, watching it cover the city like a blanket, and felt something pure and warm fill his heart. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing outside looking in. He was home. And so, the man who once spent Christmas alone had found his place again. Not through grand miracles or luck, but through love, laughter, and the kindness of one small girl who believed that nobody should be alone during the holidays. And as the snow continued to fall, the city lights shimmering through the night, it felt like the world itself was smiling back at him, quiet, gentle, and full of hope.